welcome to the Cyber Show. I'm Cherry Sigmund, your host, cybersecurity authority, entrepreneur, and consultant. Tonight we have a special guest, Mr. Marion Williams. Hi, Marion.
Hi, Cherry. How are you doing?
Doing great. Happy Sunday. I hope you've had a good weekend, had a good trip.
Oh, it's been relaxing. I'm still just loving just getting away from the DMV area and just trying to, get out there and enjoy the open air. Nice little trip away. I wrote down a inner tube, so that was fun.
Oh, awesome.
But, looking forward to killing the week.
Oh, away from the Beltway. I kind of miss some of those days. We had a lot of fun up there at the Puzzle Palace, which is our nickname for the Pentagon. And some trips out to the Eastern Shore, out there, Ocean City, Maryland. Yeah. And some really good seafood places. Marion knows the best seafood places all over the DMV area. So tonight on the Cyber Show, we're going to cover three things. And essentially, the first one has to do with very current topic in the U.S. especially, are elections, mail-in ballots, and the security of those, that sort of thing. So we'll talk all about the election and the discussion around mail-in ballots. The second thing is we're going to talk about resumes and how to tweak your resume. Marion has some really good tips on that we were just talking about earlier today. And last, we're going to introduce something that I'm talking to some folks about doing in terms of training videos. And this is in response to feedback and questions from the audience and the public about how to do risk management. I mean, really, how do you define the risk in terms of vulnerabilities, threats, and security controls? So there's a series upcoming of training videos that we're going to talk a little bit about at the end. All right, so I'll turn it over to you, Marion. What do you think about mail-in ballots and the security of those?
Well, whenever we do anything in the cyber world, right, really, you're doing a task that has existed since the country's founding. Right, you always had a way of coordinating elections, right? And there's a huge federal bureaucracy that's devoted just to doing that. So whether you have a mail-in ballot or you have an actual physical location where someone goes in, there's always going to be complications related to the media, right? It used to be you physically went into a location and you voted, and then to account for people who are, say, in the military or overseas, they allow people to mail in ballots, right? So that's always been the case. Well, this is the 21st century. And so now you have the technology to actually, when you go into your ballots, you don't fill out. I remember when I was in high school, you don't fill out the ballots anymore. Now you do. It's a little different. When I was in high school, when I voted for the first time, they actually had the machines that you pulled the curtain and then you actually clicked off, I want to vote for this person. That was it, So that's how you did stuff. And so now you walk into a building, and there are actual computers that are set up to coordinate voting. Well, that has a lot of interesting implications for how people are going to do things because, when you click the ballot, there's always the ability for something to go wrong, for fraud or. Back in Bush versus Gore, Bush v. Gore, you had the issue of the hanging Chad and all that kind of stuff. There's a huge number of shows on CNN just talking about Chads. I remember doing, I had a class once where actually that was one of our projects was to actually look at that discussion and kind of summarize it. So you always had these kind of things that are going on. So as we move forward and we're looking at, there's nothing that says I can't use my laptop to cast a vote, right? The big thing in terms of a cybersecurity perspective is how do I authenticate that I am who I say I am? There's also an issue of, could people do a man-in-the-middle attack and actually intercept the information and change it, right? So there are all these kind of issues, but if you think about it, there's always issues because if I send something in the mail and there's some unscrupulous people who are intercepting the mail, then there's a risk that someone could actually just take my ballot and not count it, right? So you never ever will get away from a system that is 100% foolproof. What you can do is you can implement something that Cherry and I have been working on as far as ballots, or in terms of looking at what the security controls, how would you minimize the risk? Because security is always balancing benefit against the cost of a control, right? So how do you maximize those kinds of things? Well, the big thing you do with that is try to figure out, for the greatest number of people, can you make the risk small enough that it's palatable? Because you never eliminate all the risk, but can you minimize the risk to a point where people can accept it, and the greatest number of people in the country are going to be able to take advantage of it, right? So those are all kinds of concerns, and those concerns have morphed somewhat because of things moving online, but they've always existed. There's always bad actors, and so what happens is, just like when you have a car, and back in the '90s, I remember there was this thing called the club. I'm dating myself, but you had a club, and you actually put the club on the, you put it on the wheel of your car, or your steering column, and it stopped the person from just breaking in and stealing it. And how I explain that is, that stops the kid who's going to take your car out for a joyride. It does not stop the professional car thief.
No.
So the issue is, do you want to stop the person who's just doing, has limited experience and is just trying to play around with stuff, or do you want to actually stop a criminal syndicate from doing something? And the question becomes is, how do you do that? And is it cost effective to do that? Right? So these are all kinds of questions that are not just about technology, because technology is a wonderful thing, but technology is also something that introduces other challenges, right? Sure. So if I have a mail-in ballot, I can send that ballot in, and if a person were to infiltrate the U.S. Postal Service, that my ballot may not ever get to where I need to go. That might happen. If the person or a group of people may say, well, okay, they know what the mail-in ballots look like. They're going to reroute the ballots so that they get routed to another place, another location, and they're not counted in time for the election. So
the dead letter drop to the dead letter section.
Yeah, there's all these kinds of things that happen, and the question becomes, how much of a risk are people willing to take? Or how much of a risk are they willing to accept to ensure that the election that they actually are voting for, the candidate that they're voting for, actually their preference for that candidate will actually be reflected in the actual vote counts. And so there's all this kind of stuff. So the question becomes, is it ready for prime time? My personal opinion, I would say, is, as much as I'd like to go online and just log onto a website and authenticate by either, voice print or having an iris scan, or, all this kind of other stuff, or having even using something like a one-time password. All of these things would be great if the federal government would improve the amount of money that's going into election security, right? And for whatever reason, there has been a reluctance on the part of the federal government to do that. I actually worked next to a group at Homeland Security that was actually involved in that. So I was physically located. I didn't do that work. But the question becomes, could you design a system that would actually make those claims there? Could you actually say, well, I'm going to reduce the risk to something that somebody would be able to accept, and ensure that the greatest number of voters around the country, irrespective of their political stance, political party, socioeconomic level, racial background, etc., all these kind of characteristics, if I could do that and make sure that everyone was able to vote, if anything else, what I would do as a potential solution was, there's been a whole call for equity, right? Because African Americans typically have been, in some areas, it's been harder for them to vote. So I would say if you're going to make this available to people, I'd say start with the public libraries.
Mm-hmm.
Because public
Everybody has
libraries,
access to that.
everybody has access to it.
Yeah.
You can easily install cameras to have a phone or have a passport. I've actually done a clearance background investigation in this COVID environment where I actually had my passport and my driver's license to authenticate me across Zoom. So I know that the technology exists.
It's Corona times, buddy.
It's Corona
times.
So there are all these things that exist. The question becomes, how much risk are people willing to take? And are people willing to make the investments that are going to be needed to build up the existing network of computers? Because throughout the country, I don't think there's any public library that doesn't have internet access, and a lot of them actually have access to paid databases. It's easier to pay money to a service to get access to periodicals than it is to actually carry the periodicals, right?
Yeah.
And you keep all that stuff up to date. Well,
and even LexisNexis. I like to go to the library and use LexisNexis.
Right, and those are all kinds of things. I remember when I was growing up, there was always, if I had to write a book report, I would come home and I'd tell my father, "Yes, Dad, I need to write a book report." And so we'd wait until he finished dinner, and then after that, normally my sister and I would go, because my sister loved reading. She's an attorney now. So it's kind of like that's what she does for a living. But she would, we would get in the family car and we would go to the public library. Now we wouldn't go to the public library. We'd just go downstairs and get on a computer. Right. So these are all kinds of things, and the access that the average person has in their cell phones is greater than the computing power of the cell phone is greater in many cases than what put man on the moon. All of these kind of things exist, and the bigger thing is how do you leverage those technologies? How do you make sure that people can do these things in ways that are productive and cost effective? And I would think that if you looked at the existing infrastructure of the library, everybody's got a high speed connection, right? A lot of the Congress has made that equipping the libraries with high speed internet connections. They're writing that kind of stuff into the FCC. Congress through the FCC is actually doing that. So it says that they have to provide this kind of service, which actually does help the underserved to access the computers and access the internet. So all of these are things that are low cost ways of accessing infrastructure, and they could actually use these kind of things in ways that would get people out. So, for example, you could actually say, well, all right, if you need to use a computer and you don't have access, libraries are one place. Department of Motor Vehicles is another.
True.
Now with the new, there's a new driver's license requirement that you have to have. That driver's license requires so much more documentation to establish that you are a U.S. citizen and you have the right to vote.
That meets the photo ID requirement right there.
Right.
And I think this year, since I moved, my polling place is just down the street at the local high school, the new high school. I don't know what the setup's going to be like, but I just know I got a mail several months ago about this year, and along with my new card, my voter card.
And those kind of things allow you to access the physical place. But one of the things that happens when you start thinking about a laptop, or you start thinking about your phone, or you start thinking about other types of, whether you have a tablet, phone, other kinds of technology, all of that is really a means to gain access to the internet. And you could set up a specialty site that has, they could actually put the top level encryption on it. Mm-hmm. They could do reverse proxying. They could deny. They could put you on a whitelist. So, for example, if you want to do stuff from home, they say, okay, you can only do things from home if you have a computer, and your computer has been put onto a whitelist, so that when I have a one-time password, when you log in, it's only going to allow you to log in from this machine. That's another way of securing access to a site. So these are all kinds of, these are options. And most of these options are not necessarily the most technologically sophisticated. These technologies have been around for at least a decade. And they're mature and accepted. And there are many government sites that actually use this technology right now. So you can use these things. The political will gets into, could you do this large scale basis? And could you express all of these kind of things out, spread these things out so that you don't have to run into problems of equity or run into problems of existing infrastructure not being there. And the other thing that this also brings up an issue of, we've been talking, there's been several episodes we've had in the past where we're talking about there's so much stuff that's going on, and people are working from home now, and there's all these other opportunities to do things from home. And how much are corporations and government customers, clients, how much are they actually willing to make things available, right? Traffic patterns have changed. So instead of all your traffic originating from one location, it's now originating from a home.
All over the place.
Right. Yeah. Well, all of that is going to have implications for how you access things, what you do, even the time, right? It used to be that, I know that most people are going to go to work from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 or 10 to 6, or, they're going to have these kind of different days, right? Well, all those different times correlate to traffic patterns. So where traffic originates on, people can hack things, where traffic locates, it originates from, is a big determinant of what gets hacked. And to some extent, what are the security controls and the infrastructure requirements to protect data, because people are not in a building, they're in their own personal homes.
Right. Hey, that'd be a great topic to wrap up on our number 3 topic. We're talking about the training videos. Let me tell you really quick what happened this morning in terms of risk management, something totally off the wall. Here in South Carolina, we're actually in Sparta, North Carolina. Shortly after 8 o'clock a.m. today, there was an earthquake. You never have earthquakes in South Carolina. I mean, never. Really. I think the earliest one was 1916. So it happened about 90, and I felt it. The whole neighborhood felt it. All of my neighbors in neighboring cities felt it. But it was in Sparta, North Carolina, which is about 92 miles north of where I live now. And it's just, the whole bed shook. The dogs were barking, and all the neighbors were talking about it. I went out to water this morning. The people were walking by. Did you feel that? It was an earthquake. The Facebook HOA group was blowing up. It was an earthquake. What's going on? And the people who were relocated from other places, like up north in California, were like, oh, it's just an earthquake. And the people here are freaking out because it was 5.1 on the Richter scale. And you don't have that in the Carolinas, not typically.
5.1.
Like another 2020 thing. So I think the whole election year 2020, the whole 2020 has been great. People were joking about, well, what's next? A Sharknado? Just roll
things, right?
It's already August. I mean, it's already almost mid-August, and before you know it, the year will be over, and we'll be ringing in the new year and singing Auld Lang Syne, and here's 2021. But it's been a very interesting year so far.
And we'll probably be doing this on Zoom. New Year's on Zoom.
We'll get on Zoom. Yeah, so we had an earthquake this morning. So that's a different segue into another topic, but I actually did something last night on Pink Wall Street, and I did a little presentation, and I was talking about my career path and success tips and cybersecurity in general, and I was going back to some of my days at the Pentagon and just thinking about some things and getting a little reminiscent about that thing. And so that's a great segue into talking about the next topic that we introduced earlier, was talking about resumes and how to tweak your resume to match what you're doing and maximizing your career path. So would you like to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Oh my goodness. I've had people who've come to me and and this has been kind of a consistent thing that's been happening over the last 5 years at different levels in their career. You have people who are just getting out of college who are just saying, okay, how do I tweak my resume? I want to work for the federal government, or I want to work for a nonprofit, and most people right now are setting up these entire new these systems that actually they work by keywords. And if you don't have enough of of your keywords dispersed throughout your resume, that the machine actually acknowledges that yes, the things that you're searching for are going to be needed, and this is what's tied to this job. Even if you're highly qualified, you will not get access to those things. And I ran into this kind of problem myself because I remember 10 years ago, or actually 11 years ago, when I started working for CIOG6 in Crystal City, Virginia. I literally applied for a job that I was doing as a contractor. Mm-hmm. The job got sent to Fort Belvoir. Mm-hmm. I'm doing the exact same job. Yeah. And had received high quality, high remarks from the client and from Lockheed Martin. And I was deemed not qualified because of how my resume was.
It wasn't SEO, it wasn't search engine optimization friendly. It's kind of like a Google search. The keywords need to be near the top of the resume, right? Is that what I hear you saying?
I think it needs to be throughout. I think it needs to be throughout. And in particular, with federal jobs, they have a way of doing that. And so one of the things that kind of got me, just to reflect back on my days in undergrad, going back to, I majored in public management as an undergraduate. And one of the things that hit me was there was a political scientist by the name of Luther Gulick. And I remember it was just like this factoid. We talked about him, and then it was like, okay, we said this, and then we went on to other stuff. But he came across my mind one day. And this was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And every time I've subsequently gone through and I wrote my resume according to this, mm-hmm. He had this acronym called POSDECORP. And it's like, wait a minute, what POSDECORP? And all of these are, he's a political scientist. He recently died. He died in 1993 at the age of 100. But he got his doctorate out of Columbia. He headed their Institute for Public Administration. And he had done a lot of work. He was actually asked by FDR to actually look at the federal bureaucracy and define what do they do. And I noticed that as I started writing my resume according to this kind of formula kind of thing, it actually helps. And so I've actually been able to get people raises, from say one person was an IT guy, and he came up from IT, and he had been doing the work. He's now he was in his 50s then, late 50s, and he's doing he's managing projects. And all I did was I laid out POSDECORP. Just imagine you put this on a wall, and you put these kind of things in, right? And then you take your tasks. So POSDECORP, I can't remember the exact things, but it stands for planning, organizing, staffing, directing, controlling, and I think budgeting. These are all the kind of things. If you look at Luther Gulick, he has a Wikipedia page. If you look at those core functions, I remember it was my first course in public administration. They actually talked about that. He was in the book. And what I did was I just laid out those functions. And then once those functions were laid out, I take a person's resume and I cut and paste. And I say, okay, this task is here. So I have a friend of mine that is, she's trying to get a job with the federal government. So, and she's not a cyber person. She's a background investigator. Mm-hmm. And so, she got a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon. In public policy. Very good program. And so I said, okay, let's think about this. Why don't you say, one thing she did was she was actually in charge of a project, and she had a staff of people that were working for her, and she's doing things. And I'm like, okay. And so I said, let's think about what you really did. Okay. I see here you talk about planning, I said, did you do a work breakdown structure for all of these activities that you did? I said, you said, yeah. I said, okay. Well, let's look at this. You took these activities. This report was the end result, right? But to get to this end result, you had to plan and coordinate the activities of all of these people who worked under you, and you had to report out, and you reported variances, and you led groups. And I said all of these are activities that. So I looked at the resume. I took the task and I put them in the appropriate buckets. And as I did that, I started to see something. Oh, yeah. So then you get a thesaurus and you cross-reference the information. Well, look at the tasks that you have. Oh, okay. I planned, I organized, I staffed, I coordinated, I did all this stuff, right? I budgeted. Mm-hmm. And then you look for synonyms to those words. And then you rewrite your task according to those words. Now, in terms of working in a bureaucracy, one of the things you might want to do is take that bureaucracy, and there's always things that are happening, right? So, if you're talking about, let's say this is a group that's dealing with cyber issues. Let's say Cybercom, Army Cybercom, right? Cyber Command. Okay, if you got Army Cyber Command, there's a ton of stuff online that's public information. What do you see people doing? What kinds of projects they're doing? I work on a project called ETAS, Enterprise IT as a Service, right? So there's all these kind of things. So when I start talking about what I'm doing, I look at what is going on across the Army, and I look at different, I look at their, Google the various different keywords, and I look at those things, and I say, how does what I'm doing tie into those things? And as I do that, I now have a language or vocabulary for describing what it is I do. Mm-hmm. And if you do that consistently, you'll find that these keywords keep showing up. If you're applying for a job that has those keywords in it, well, you're gonna find you're probably gonna have a greater deal of connection. You're gonna hit a lot more of those keywords, more so than if you just at random describe what you did. But remember, Luther Gulick's work was to describe for FDR was to describe what does the federal government do? What work does it perform? Those functions were descriptions of what the federal government performs. Mm-hmm. So as you begin the process of thinking through those things, and you tie your resume to those, and you tie the keywords to the other kind of pieces, you get a three-chord chain, right? You've got the actual word, the things that the federal government does. You've got what you've done, and you've got synonyms that talk to all of those things. So as you start to do that and try to incorporate as many of those keywords as possible, if nothing else, someone's going to see your resume, because it's going to bubble up to decision makers. Now, I'm not saying that
basically, it's no matter what profession. What I hear you saying, Marion, is no matter what profession you're in. We're using cyber as an example, but no matter who you are listening or what you do, if you're applying for a job or wanting to use either a CV or resume and make it relevant and get past the automated system to screen you out, make it relevant and friendly to get past the computer to the human, so they can actually come talk to you or call you in for a conversation. Yeah.
Yes. And I actually, I was hired by the National Security Agency, and I used that same process. So when they saw all of the things that I had done, and I used that way of describing them, it bubbled up to someone looking at it and say, yes, I want to talk to this person. And then they called me, and then I interviewed, because what you have to remember, your resume, the whole purpose of your resume, its function is not to sell you. Its function is to get you through the door so you can have a conversation. You sell yourself.
The conversation sells you. Yeah, the interview.
Right. How you sell yourself is, you have to get through the door. If you get through the door, then you can talk about what you've done. Mm-hmm. And then, the other thing I would say is just make sure that for those tasks you have at least 2 or 3 examples, so that a person says, well, you tell me about this. Then you can actually go into detail about what you've done. If you do that consistently, the person says, well, okay, this person says that they do these things. They've got 2 or 3 examples to explain that. And for people who want to be a federal employee, one of the things that happens is they'll have questionnaires that they have you say, have you done this? And they ask you to what extent you've done this. Mm-hmm. So if you do all those kinds of things, if someone actually, you get to an actual interview, you'll be in a place to actually say, I've done these things. I'm an expert in this thing. I've done this. And they talk about the degree to which you've done this unassisted. Well, I can actually say, well, I've done these things and this is how I've done them.
That's good stuff. Well, thanks for that, Marion. So it's time to move on to topic 3 so we can keep it on time tonight. I think I'll introduce this part because as we were talking earlier, and I've also talked with some other people in virtual chief information security officer roles, VCISO roles. And what we came up with is a common question, a common thing that's out that people just have a fuzzy area, it's a gray area. People don't really understand. The question comes up a lot about, well, how do I do risk management? How do I really assess what's important? How do I know? And so what we've come up with is something that we're going to create here over the next several weeks, starting with security controls. And basically, we're taking a risk scenario, just choosing one that's very common, this kind of white label that's not really branded for a specific company. This is generic across multiple industries, across multiple businesses, across multiple public and private sector organizations. A very common type of risk. And with a pattern, we have in one column will be a list of vulnerabilities, in a second column will be a list of threats, and in a third column on the video we'll discuss the potential security controls that could address those vulnerabilities and threats. And we'll go through in detail, one by one, and explain those, because what we're finding, especially from VCISO Consulting, is that not just the practitioners, but the people on the business side don't really understand the details and the granularity of what the security controls really are. It's just a bunch of, gobbledygook or jargon or something that the security nerds talk about. But the idea is to break it down in a 101 fashion to make it understandable by the layperson. So it's good for the business, it's good for practitioners, it's good for the owners, the decision makers, the boards, the executives, anybody who might need to understand that, from the vulnerabilities to the threats to the security controls. So that's what we've been up to. Would you like to expand a little bit more on that, Marion, before we wrap for the night?
Sure. And business people are already familiar with the kind of controls they're talking about. So, for example, if you're working in an organization, irrespective of industry, one of the controls that you might have might be that, okay, for all purchases above a certain dollar amount, you have to have 2 signatures. Mm-hmm. It might be that you have to have, you have mandatory vacations where people have to rotate out so that you can actually start to see, well, okay, there's no single point of failure. You might have other kind of things where you get into your systems. Maybe you do backups. These are all kinds of things that you do, and it's interesting because there's so many things that exist that if you're not aware of them, security folks in general and IT folks in particular oftentimes tend to talk to each other. Yeah. And they go into a lot of detail, and that detail is a way to communicate among peers. But the problem is when you communicate among peers in ways that don't facilitate understanding. Right. You run the risk that the person, you think you've said something that they can relate to, mm-hmm. and they're just like, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. So when you start thinking about those kinds of things, how you set up your systems, how you communicate risk, what's important to you from a risk perspective is a lot of times dictated by industry. Banking and healthcare are 2 very highly regulated industries, sure. And have different appetites for risk and what they're willing to do. Well, that's fine and good, but you have to be able to think about, well, what do I want to do with respect to risk? How much? Because you can never eliminate it, because as you start to mitigate one set of risks, technology comes along and introduces another set. We just talked about that today, where you talk about, it used to be that you would go to a place and you would get you would get your votes and you vote at this place. And it used to be that you would, it used to be on a paper ballot. You just fill out the person. And now, when I graduated high school back in the '90s, you literally had my first voting activity was I went into the atrium in our high school, and I closed a curtain around me, and I just clicked say I wanted to vote for President Clinton. That was my first activity as a voter, right? That was the first election I ever was able to vote in, and I voted ever since. But that changed now, because now when I voted just recently in the primaries for Maryland, I literally went into a room or went to a gymnasium, and I voted using a computer. I filled out the thing, and I put my ballot. I went through. The computer checked it. It then gave me a receipt that said, "This is who you voted for," and then I left. I got a little sticker, and then I left the.
I voted.
Voted.
I've done both. I've done paper and computer-based ballots. It's
these are all kinds of things.
No matter who you vote for, just get out and vote. It's a privilege and an experience that you should take advantage of. Just make your voice heard. I'm all for voting.
But all those kinds of things involve different amounts of risk. Being able to just sit down at your computer and fire up your laptop and go and log on to a secure site and boom, do voting. It's an opportunity. The technology exists, and there are a number of security controls that actually go along with that. That could actually make that happen. But the big issue that you have to remember is how much risk are you willing to accept